Hey, stuffers! If the Tin Man represents the American steelworker, why isn't he screaming about union contracts right now? Alex here, and welcome back to Stuff with Alex. We're diving deep into a movie that is supposed to be pure Technicolor fantasy, the defining movie of American childhood. A place of rainbows, singing dwarves, and ruby slippers. But what if the yellow brick road was paved with political intentions, and the Emerald City was financed by a decades-long currency war? Beneath the surface of this beloved film lies a history of genuine tragedy, a roadmap of radical economic theory, and a philosophy so potent it challenges all established authority. For 85 years, The Wizard of Oz has been a cultural lightning rod. Rumors persist of a set curse, of munchkins meeting a terrible end, and of a psychedelic synchronicity with Pink Floyd. But the real story is darker, weirder, and far more deliberate than any myth. Did L Frank Baum, the author, intend to write a hidden manual for political revolution? Was the movie studio forced to edit out the literal silver bullet to America's economic woes? And why the heck was the magical snow that saved Dorothy and her friends made of highly toxic industrial asbestos? The central mystery isn't if the film has hidden meaning, but rather which hidden meaning is the true operating system and why Hollywood tried so hard to hide it. This episode will comprehensively explore how The Wizard of Oz transforms from a beloved children's fantasy into a complex cultural text, analyzing the verifiable production horrors, the scholarly theories of political and spiritual allegory, the psychological mechanisms behind modern synchronization myths, and synthesizing these threads to understand why this story endures as America's greatest and darkest illusion. When you think of the golden age of Hollywood, you picture glamour, sweeping musical numbers, and in the case of 1939's The Wizard of Oz, revolutionary Technicolor. But beneath that vibrant palette lay a hellscape of industrial negligence and documented abuse. The rumors that this set was cursed aren't entirely unfounded, but they stem not from supernatural forces, but from powerful studio executives who prioritized spectacle over human life. This wasn't magic gone wrong. This was industrial age corner cutting. The first major horror story involves the Tin Man. Originally played by the actor Buddy Ebsen, the production team faced the challenge of making a flesh-and-blood person look like gleaming metal. Their ingenious solution? Aluminum powder makeup. The studio required Ebsen to cover himself completely in the metallic dust. After filming for 10 days, Ebsen began experiencing severe pain and cramping. He was eventually rushed to the hospital with catastrophic lung failure, narrowly surviving after being hospitalized for 2 weeks. The metallic dust had coated his lungs, causing them to fail. He was replaced by Jack Haley. Now here's the kicker. Haley missed 4 days of filming himself after the reformulated aluminum paste caused a severe eye infection, proving the toxicity issues persisted, although his health consequences were less severe than Ebsen's near-death experience. This isn't a coincidence. It is studio negligence writ large. The film's opening premise that an average Kansas girl gets swept up into a nightmare was mirrored by the average actors and crew getting swept up into a toxic, unchecked workplace. The dangers didn't end with the Tin Man's makeup. Remember the beautiful, serene moment when Glinda the Good Witch saves Dorothy and the gang from the Wicked Witch's sleep-inducing poppy field by making it snow? That iconic magical blizzard was in reality a toxic cloud of carcinogen. The fake snow was made of 100% industrial-grade chrysotile asbestos, which visually resembles real snow and was sold under brand names like Snowdrift. The hazards of asbestos were known during the 1930s. Moreover, because the sets were highly flammable, particularly the Scarecrow's straw costume, the studio reportedly fireproofed the outfits and the sets using even more asbestos. Margaret Hamilton's burning broom, wielded during the melting scene, was also reportedly fireproofed with asbestos. It is quite an irony that the Land of Oz, the ultimate fantasy, was actually a closed-set death trap. Forget the wicked witches, the real villain was OSHA, or the 1930s version of it, who apparently slept through the whole process. The list of injuries extends further. Margaret Hamilton, Wicked Witch, suffered second- and third-degree burns during her dramatic trapdoor exit scene when the copper-based makeup she wore reacted dangerously to the pyrotechnics, causing it to ignite. Her stunt double was also hospitalized after another explosion. Beyond the physical danger, there is the deeply upsetting established fact that Judy Garland, only a teenager, was overworked, fed studio-mandated drugs to keep her performance schedule, and allegedly subjected to horrifying abuses. This pervasive pattern of extreme health hazards and systemic emotional trauma is what truly gave rise to the enduring myth of the Oz curse. It is easier for the public to believe in a vengeful spirit than it is for us to confront the chilling fact that a powerful studio system knowingly exposed its labor force, including child actors, to lethal materials and devastating emotional trauma. The curse narrative simply serves to externalize the trauma and protect the film's image of innocence by blaming fate instead of accountability. Stuffers, hit that like button if your brain's already spiraling, knowing that a movie about going home was filmed in a place that made people pray they could just go home. If the production negligence was the established historical trauma, then the next set of theories represents the collective, anxious attempt to create a sensational, hidden trauma. And no theory is more persistent or more creepy than the legend of the hanging munchkin. The disturbing urban legend claims that during the scene where Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man skip down the road toward the Emerald City, a dark silhouette can be seen hanging in the background trees. The story goes that a heartbroken munchkin actor died by suicide, casting a dark shadow over the edge of the frame. This grim theory gained exponential traction years later, not in the theaters, but in the home video era. When VCRs and DVDs allowed viewers to pause and rewind and scrutinize the dark edges of the frame, the ambiguous shadow became subject to intense, often obsessive scrutiny. Let's be clear, this is a myth, one that has been repeatedly and comprehensively debunked. The figure in question is, without question, a large bird, likely a vulture or a crane, borrowed from the Los Angeles Zoo and allowed to roam the massive indoor set to give it a more outdoorsy feel. The unusual movement that sparked the speculation is simply the bird stretching its neck or wings. Given the exhaustive and complicated process of 1939 Technicolor filming, small continuity errors like a rogue bird on the backdrop were often difficult to mask in the final cut. The true culprit here is not tragedy, but poor continuity and the human brain's uncanny ability to find dark patterns. This myth's persistence is fascinating because it tells us so much about how we, as an audience, process media. The human mind often prefers a sensational, dark conclusion to a mundane explanation. It aligns perfectly with a cognitive preference for drama over simple reality, much like the famous smaller phenomenon we call the Mandela effect. Did you perhaps remember the Wicked Witch of the West shouting, "Fly, my pretties, fly," before sending her winged minions? Almost everyone does. But in the movie, she actually shouts, "Fly, fly, fly," a line far less dramatic than the one our collective memory has written for her. The impulse to believe in the hanging myth and the need to misremember the witch's line are symptoms of the same phenomenon. The desire to validate the feeling that the production was cursed, or that the story must contain a complex, darker truth than what is presented on the surface. The theory fails to hold up to the facts, but it succeeds as a modern cultural mirror. The travelers in Oz sought external proof of courage or brains. The modern audience seeks external proof of a hidden tragedy or secret code. In both instances, the true meaning is obscured by the quest for outside validation. We have covered the production horrors and the fan myths. Now, let's pivot to the most enduring and academically validated theory of them all. The Oz book, written in 1900 by L Frank Baum, is a political and economic allegory for the tumultuous American financial landscape of the 1890s. This theory posits that the entire story is a satirical commentary on the battle between the gold standard and the movement for the free coinage of silver led by the Populist Party. L. Frank Baum was not just a simple children's writer. Before writing Oz, he was a newspaper editor in the western frontier of the Dakota Territory, actively publishing commentary on the politics and social issues of the day. He later moved to Chicago and was there in 1896 when William Jennings Bryan, the fiery populist politician, gave his legendary Cross of Gold speech, passionately demanding that the U.S. adopt silver alongside gold, bimetallism, to stabilize the economy. To understand the core conflict of Oz, you must understand the financial crisis of the 1890s. The U.S. was essentially on the gold standard, and the money supply was growing too slowly relative to real output, causing massive deflation. This meant farmers and debtors were crushed. They had to pay back loans taken out in dearer gold dollars with cheaper deflated currency. The populists saw bimetallism, using both gold and silver, as the necessary inflationary policy to stabilize prices, which is measured in ounces. This economic context provides the skeleton for the entire narrative. The capital city is named Oz, which is the common abbreviation of ounce, the unit used to measure gold and silver, placing currency directly at the heart of the journey. Dorothy, the average American, is forced to travel down the yellow brick road, which symbolizes the rigid fixed gold standard that the establishment insisted upon. The destination, the Emerald City, represents Washington, D.C., where illusion, requiring green glasses to enter, obscures the simple truth of the economy. The allegorical mapping of the companions is scholarly consensus. The scarecrow symbolizes the American farmer, struggling during the agricultural crisis, often dismissed by the financial elite as lacking the brain or intellect to understand complex finance. The Tin Man represents the industrial worker, dehumanized by the factory system. The failure of the American steel industry is sometimes cited, demanding a heart or humanitarian consideration from their employees and fighting for union rights. The Cowardly Lion is often seen as a direct metaphor for William Jennings Bryan, the powerful populist politician. He had a great, courageous roar in his speeches, but ultimately lacked the political courage or traction to achieve victory in the crucial 1896 election. The Wicked Witches symbolize the powerful, destructive interests opposing the common man. The Wicked Witch of the East is the Eastern banking and financial elite, while the Wicked Witch of the West represents Western industrial oil barons or the constant threat of drought, dissolved by water, an allusion to monetary liquidity. This leads us to the most crucial piece of evidence, one that Hollywood deliberately obscured. In Baum's original 1900 book, the magic shoes Dorothy takes from the Wicked Witch of the East are silver slippers. Dorothy traveled the gold road wearing silver slippers. This juxtaposition was the political punchline. Bimetallism was the simple solution, the key to solving deflation, and the Westerners, Dorothy, had the answer: viable currency of the people the whole time. In the 1939 MGM film, the studio changed the silver slippers to the now famous ruby slippers. By swapping silver, a color with specific radical economic meaning in 1896, for ruby, a visually stunning but economically neutral color, the studio fundamentally neutered the book's core political critique. The book was a revolutionary economic satire. The film became a simple quest for self-realization. The fact that Hollywood took the time and effort to make this change confirms the political intent of the original work, but also shows the powerful interests at work to sanitize radical material for mass appeal decades later. Monetary Allegory Decoding, the Populist Blueprint. This structural change reveals a foundational truth about how authority operates. The studio was effectively erasing a blueprint for economic self-determination, preferring to refocus the lesson on internal, non-challenging psychology. You always have the power. Rather than external, institutional challenge, you always had the economic solution. We now move from the historical conspiracy to the modern cultural one, the dark side of the rainbow. This is perhaps the most famous and universally shared conspiracy theory surrounding the film. But unlike the populist allegory, this one is entirely accidental. The theory claims that if you start Pink Floyd's seminal 1973 album, The Dark Side of the Moon, precisely at the third roar of the MGM Lion, the music and the 1939 film sync up in uncanny and meaningful ways. Fans suggest moments like the song The Great Gig in the Sky perfectly matching the cyclone sequence, or the lyrics from Brain Damage aligning with the Scarecrow's quest for intelligence. The pairing became hugely popular in the mid-1990s, passed around on early internet forums and bootleg VHS tapes. The sheer power of this supposed synchronicity leads many to believe it had to be intentional. However, Pink Floyd members, including drummer Nick Mason, have explicitly denied any connection, calling the idea unthinkable. Alan Parsons, the Floyd's album's audio engineer, similarly confirmed there was no intentional link. So, if the band denies it, why does the connection feel so strong? This is where psychology takes over. Analysts explain that this phenomenon is a prime example of apophenia, the brain's tendency to see meaningful connections or patterns in unrelated data. The effect works because both the film and the album share specific artistic characteristics. The Dark Side of the Moon is a concept album focused on universal themes of anxiety, madness, and the pressures of life, making its evocative music easily relatable to any dramatic narrative arc. Simultaneously, The Wizard of Oz possesses a highly cohesive yet dreamlike quality, which encourages the viewer to suspend disbelief and easily mold disparate elements together. The persistence of the dark side of the rainbow myth acts as a fascinating modern cultural mirror to the film's core thematic flaw. Just as Dorothy and her friends traveled to the wizard, seeking external validation for their inherent qualities, the modern audience watches the synchronization, seeking an external authority, Pink Floyd's secret instruction manual, to validate the film's meaning. When the band explicitly denies the connection, the viewer is forced to acknowledge that the meaning and the synchronicity were created entirely within their own perceptual and cognitive efforts. This makes the Wizard of Floyd theory a meta-allegory for the realization that the power of interpretation resides entirely within the viewer, not the text itself. The populist allegory gives Oz its political framework, but the narrative's deep structure is arguably spiritual. We must consider the confirmed spiritual beliefs of the author L Frank Baum, who, alongside his family, was deeply involved in Theosophy. Theosophy is a spiritual movement focused on the search for truth and a personal connection to spiritualism, often standing in opposition to organized religion and dogma. Baum did not have a high opinion of religious leaders and often criticized organized religion for telling people what to think, suggesting they should let people think for themselves. He explained Theosophy in his newspaper as not a religion, but rather a society of people seeking for truth. He even stated that the story of Oz itself came through pure inspiration and that the great author used him as an instrument. When viewed through this lens, the journey becomes a roadmap for individual spiritual realization. Many of the central elements shift from being simple fantasy elements to profound spiritual archetypes. The yellow brick road. This path represents the golden path of spiritual awakening, along which the soul travels to a state of spiritual realization. Glinda, the good witch of the north, she's identified as an other-dimensional being of light or celestial power. When she saves Dorothy from the sleep-inducing poppies, which represent spiritual sleep or illusion known as Maya, she is functioning as a force to wake Dorothy from this spiritual stupor. The Wicked Witch of the West, she embodies the shadow aspect of the self, the dark, unintegrated ego, our Mr. Hyde that every individual must face. Dorothy confronts the shadow, and when the witch melts, the water used represents consciousness. The narrative dictates that self-actualization isn't about destroying the shadow, but confronting and integrating it. The wizard, he is the perfect satirical target for Baum, the man who distrusted organized authority. The wizard represents the religious charlatans, or false gurus who claim to speak for transcendent power while being little men behind a curtain, motivated by greed and control. This perspective reveals a crucial theme: the condemnation of false authority. Baum uses the fantasy structure to simultaneously critique two sources of external control: the material, financial political interests, and the metaphysical, false religious spiritual leaders. In both the political and the spiritual reading, the wizard is the symbol of externalized power that attempts to manipulate the seeker by claiming to possess what the seeker already owns. The entire quest is a lesson in realizing intrinsic worth, culminating in Glinda's simple instruction, "You've always had the power to go back." The statement, "There's no place like home," is interpreted not as a geographical observation, but as the realization that the kingdom of heaven, or ultimate truth, is a condition, not a physical destination. Truth is found within, meaning one does not have to search for mystics or exotic religions. The power resides in one's own backyard. This prepares the ground for a single unified theory of control. Drop your wildest, non-dangerous theory about the Tin Man's lack of a heart in the comments below. I want to know if he's single because he ghosted too many people, or if it's the union dues. We have established 3 competing frameworks for The Wizard of Oz: the production trauma, the political-economic allegory, and the spiritual roadmap. When you lay these 3 blueprints over the top of each other, an operational model for power emerges. A model that is far more sinister and applicable to the modern world than silver coinage or asbestos. The deepest, darkest conspiracy of Oz isn't about asbestos or Brian. It's about a political, social, and psychological system designed to convince you that you are fundamentally lacking. I call this the allegory of manufactured scarcity. Manufactured scarcity is the core mechanism by which institutions, be they government, religion, or finance, maintain their power. They must first persuade the individual that they lack an essential quality, whether that is wisdom, courage, financial stability, or salvation, and then convince them that only the institution itself can bestow that quality or the symbol of it. The journey to Oz begins with a language of value and scarcity. The destination, Oz, ounce, centers the quest on a measure of worth within a city that requires filtered perception, green glasses, to appear wealthy, the definition of an illusionary fiat currency. Dorothy seeks the wizard not because she is certain of his power, but because she is convinced she cannot return home unless he grants her power. The wizard, therefore, is the perfect representation of the ultimate authority figure in a system of manufactured scarcity. He doesn't grant the characters the qualities they seek. He grants them symbols of acceptance and certification. The scarecrow gets a diploma, the lion gets a medal, and the Tin Man gets a ticking clock. Why is this important? Because these external symbols serve the system. The moment the characters accept the wizard's placebo, they are validated, not by intrinsic truth, but by the institution's stamp of approval. This effectively sends them back into the world as functioning, non-threatening participants, thereby upholding the wizard's authority, even though he is a known fraud. The diploma requires the scarecrow to return to a society that respects diplomas. The medal requires the lion to return to a society that respects military honors. The wizard's genius is in maintaining control by appearing to solve the problem while only reinforcing the need for external authority. This unified theory binds the monetary and spiritual allegories together. The bimetallism crisis was literally a conflict over manufactured financial scarcity.
the refusal to allow silver into the money supply, thus crushing the people. Dorothy's silver slippers, the economic solution, and her internal power, the spiritual solution, are both forms of inherent, unmanufactured value that the corrupt establishment must suppress to survive. The change to ruby slippers was Hollywood attempting to keep the scarcity narrative alive by removing the political solution and forcing the interpretation back to mere internal psychology. The moment of truth, the collapse of authority, is when the curtain is pulled back. The wizard is exposed as a very bad wizard, and the infrastructure of manufactured scarcity collapses. The realization is that the problem was never the lack of a heart, brain, or courage. The problem was believing the wizard who told them they lacked it in the first place. The ultimate lesson of Oz is not simply look within, but more powerfully, challenge the authority that claims you need to look up to them in the first place. The conspiracy isn't hidden. It's the operational model of institutional control itself. Manufactured illusion versus reality matrix. Alex's thesis.
The Wizard of Oz remains a conspiracy magnet precisely because it perfectly encapsulates the perennial anxieties of American life, the struggle between capital and labor, the rise of centralized government, and the search for spiritual authenticity. Every new generation finds a new code to unlock, whether it's Pink Floyd synchronization or the newest Mandela effect, because the structure of the story is perfectly designed to house these theories. Ultimately, all these theoretical frameworks, the monetary, the spiritual, the psychological, agree on the fundamental outcome. The quest was unnecessary. The greatest trick the wizard pulled was making Dorothy believe the journey was mandatory, that the solution to her problem was external, complicated, and required an intermediary. The final wisdom found is humility and discernment, the acceptance of one's own intrinsic value and the ability to detect fraudulent authority. The characters were made whole by the symbols the wizard gave them, but the true lesson lies in the recognition that the symbols were meaningless without the inherent qualities they already possessed. It forces the audience to consider, how often do we embark on an arduous journey, chasing the Emerald City, only to find the G was in our pocket the whole time? If you've watched this far, you've earned the wisdom to discern fact from fiction. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, or the flying monkeys will come for your YouTube algorithm next. For me, the lasting power of the Oz myth is about the importance of spiritual discernment. We spent time chasing ghosts, poison actors, hanging myths, secret economic codes. But the greatest deception was the simplest, believing we needed the wizard in the first place. That chase, the search for hidden esoteric knowledge or a charismatic leader to fix our problems, is the ultimate human trap. True enlightenment or true freedom isn't found by following every complicated theory down a yellow road, but by applying common sense and rigorous discernment to the voices of authority. The Tin Man story shows us that if someone is truly compassionate, they don't need a certificate. The Lion story shows us that courage isn't granted, it's demonstrated through action. Dorothy teaches us to judge by righteous judgment, not by external appearances. And as someone who finds value in that simple instruction, I always go back to a verse which speaks to testing the spirit of the matter, not just the surface show. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, for many false prophets have gone out into the world. Okay, thanks for watching. Peace out. Goodbye, guys.